It was a morning like any other in the small town of Greenwood, a place where time seemed to stretch slowly, where the streets were quiet, and where people knew all their neighbors. The cafes and restaurants were always filled with familiar faces, but today something was going to happen that would change the dynamic of this peaceful place forever. Amina worked as a cashier at a popular local cafe. She was a black woman in her 30s, smiling and energetic, with naturally frizzy hair that she wore in a bun. She had grown up in this neighborhood, in this town, and knew that every day was a mix of warm smiles and disapproving looks. But it didn't affect him anymore. Amina was accustomed to snap judgments, microaggressions, and barely concealed racist remarks. She had learned to ignore them and focus on what really mattered: her job, her family, and her dreams for a better future. That morning, as she served customers with her usual grace and calm, Margaret, a white woman in her 60s, entered the cafeteria. Her imposing appearance, her designer clothes, and the air of superiority that she displayed betrayed a woman accustomed to authority and respect, at least from those she considered inferior. Margaret was no stranger here. She came regularly, but always with this cold, distant, and often condescending attitude. Margaret shuffled into the cafeteria, her gaze scanning the place with an almost palpable indifference. The atmosphere was slightly noisy, filled with the clinking of cups and murmured conversations. Amina was behind the counter, a calm and collected cashier, her deft hands preparing the coffees with quiet precision. She was used to these kinds of mornings, where familiar faces and repetitive orders came one after the other. But Margaret was different. Margaret approached the counter, her gait rigid, her haughty air evident in every movement. She raised an eyebrow when she saw Amina, without really looking at her. Her gaze focused instead on the menu, as if she was still hesitating between options, even though she already knew exactly what she wanted. She had prepared herself for this encounter, for the indifference of a waitress who, in her opinion, did not even deserve real attention.
Margaret, a black coffee, without sugar, and without milk.
His voice was dry, almost sharp, like a control to a machine. She didn't look at Amina once. Second, as if his mere presence behind the counter didn't even deserve a human exchange. Amina nodded gently, without showing the slightest emotion. His smile was polite, if slight. She knew exactly how this kind of customer worked, how they expected to be served without expecting anything in return. But today she had no intention of letting Margaret's coldness pass without comment. Amina focused on making the coffee, the sound of the espresso machine echoing through the enclosed space. She cut the coffee and poured it with precision, taking care to let the liquid flow slowly to achieve the ideal temperature. She performed each gesture with a certain serenity, almost a form of meditation, as if to counter the brutality of the request. When the coffee was ready, Amina carefully placed it on the counter, waiting for Margaret to come get it. She knew it would be a moment like any other, but something in the air told her that this time things would be different. Margaret approached the counter without looking at Amina, reaching out to grab her coffee. But before turning on her heel, she let out a cold remark, barely a whisper, but loud enough for her to hear. "Margaret, I hope this coffee is as black as your complexion." Silence fell immediately in the cafeteria. It was as if time had stood still. The few customers present looked up, shocked by the cruelty of the remark. The noise of the cups stopped. The conversations died away instantly. Every person, even those who had not heard the remark, felt the heaviness of the atmosphere. Amina stood still for a split second, her gaze fixed on Margaret. There was a calm intensity in her eyes, a self-control that contrasted with the violence of the words that had just been thrown at her. She took a deep breath and, with an almost supernatural calmness, she responded, her tone measured but firm. "Amen. You know, madam, respect does not cost nothing, but apparently it's something you have to hard to offer you."
Amina's words struck like thunder in the silence of the cafeteria.
The effect was immediate. Margaret, who had believed that her remark would go unnoticed, found herself faced with the unthinkable. A black cashier, a woman she thought she could dispose of, had just answered her not only with dignity, but with a wisdom that struck her straight to the heart. Amina stared into Margaret's eyes, without anger, but with a calm intensity that disturbed her. She continued, without letting herself be carried away by emotion, but with quiet conviction. Amen. Maybe you should try to see beyond appearance. Behind every smile, there is a story. Behind every face, a life that deserves to be respected. But I guess it's easier to judge than learn, right? Amina's words floated in the air like a gentle but penetrating breeze. The customer's eyes slowly turned to Margaret, whose face immediately turned red. She felt destabilized, as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The murmurs of other customers began to rise, voices quiet but full of approval, subtle signs of solidarity with Amina. Margaret, who had never experienced this kind of confrontation, found herself trapped in her own arrogance. She had believed that her privileges would protect her from any questioning. But here, in this little cafe, the rules were different. The words caught in his throat. She tried to respond, but no sound came out. She knew there was nothing to say. Each attempt at justification seemed empty, insufficient, in the face of the simplicity of Amina's truth. She looked away, trying to hide her shame. At that moment, a young man, dressed in a corporate shirt and sitting at the back of the room, stood up. He approached the counter and, in a calm but firm tone, supported Amina's words. Young man, it is not up to us to apologize for the color of our skin. And if it bothers you, you are free to leave. Margaret's gaze fixed on him, then on Amina. The young man's support, like the murmurs of the other customers, left her speechless. Margaret felt completely isolated, like a stranger in a place that no longer wanted her attitude.
The truth, brutal and clear, hit her.
She had lost, but more than that, she had lost something much more precious. Her own respect and that of others. Margaret shrugged, head bowed, and turned on her heel. The clicking of his heels echoed in the cafeteria, like a final echo of his defeat. She left the place, taking with her the heavy feeling of humiliation. A heavy silence followed his departure. But little by little, the customers began to relax, the smiles multiplied, the exchanges between them became more lively. Amina returned to her task, calm as always. She had not only restored dignity to her own community, but she had shown everyone, without a cry, without an anger, that respect and dignity were things that should be granted to everyone, without exception. The gazes of customers, filled with respect and gratitude, fell on her. Amina had made more than a simple response. She had planted a seed of change in the minds of everyone who witnessed this moment. The next day, at exactly the same time, Margaret walked through the door of the cafe. This time, his steps were slower, hesitant, as if each movement was heavy with the shadow of the previous day. His gaze fled, looking for something to look at, but carefully avoiding meeting Amina's. She walked timidly towards the counter, eyes downcast, unable to bear the tension in the air, as if Amina's mere presence was forcing her into an introspection she had not intended to do before. She stopped just in front of the counter, hands clenched around her purse, as if this small gesture could help protect her from the intensity of the situation. Amina slowly raised her eyes, her gaze calm and penetrating. It was a smile, gentle but imbued with a serenity that left no room for anger. It was a smile without animosity, but full of wisdom. Amina waited patiently, observing the woman who stood there, visibly vulnerable. She knew this moment was important. A moment of transformation, for both. Margaret, her body tense with embarrassment, finally broke the silence with a trembling voice. She spoke almost in a whisper, as if searching for words that wouldn't come out, a difficult confession she had never made to anyone. Margaret, I came to apologize.
You were right.
I don't know why I did that. This wasn't fair. Her voice cracked slightly at the end, like a child caught at fault, or perhaps like someone suddenly realizing the weight of their actions. His eyes, usually cold and indifferent, desperately searched for a sign of acceptance. Amina stared at her for a moment, her eyes seeking to perceive the depths of this woman who, just yesterday, had inflicted cruel humiliation on her. She saw her struggle with her own shame, the awareness of her mistake gradually appearing on her face. It was there, in this moment of vulnerability, that Amina felt something change. A small opening in Margaret's shell, a start of reflection. Amina let her speak, without interrupting, but she did not respond immediately. She felt the heaviness of the moment, the intensity of the moment. She knew it was up to Margaret to walk this path, to face what she had said and, more importantly, what she had been. But Amina was not there to judge, nor to belittle. She chose her words carefully, a silent wisdom guiding her response. Amen. Sometimes you just need to open the eyes and see people for who they really are, and not for what we want them to be. But you don't have to apologize. It's not up to me to forgive you, but up to you to forgive yourself. Amina's words, simple but profound, penetrated Margaret's mind. She felt a strange mix of humility and gratitude. She had never heard such a response to her own mistake. She expected anger, cold indifference, maybe even verbal vengeance. But no. What she received was an invitation to redemption, an outstretched hand, not to judge her, but to offer her a chance to understand herself and transform herself. Margaret felt unsettled, lost in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She nodded slowly, unable to form the words needed to fully express what she felt. There was a heavy weight in her chest, a feeling of humility she hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if Amina had just broken something inside her, something rigid and cold, that had been shaped by years of prejudice and hasty judgments. She was no longer the same. She knew that this meeting had changed her outlook, that something had been unlocked within her. Margaret turned slightly, but instead of walking away as she was accustomed to doing, she stood there, as if suspended in time. She didn't yet know what she was going to do with this realization, but she knew one thing. She couldn't just leave as if nothing had happened. She had just experienced a lesson she never imagined in this cafe. From that day on, Margaret became a regular customer, but not the same one as before. She was no longer distant, haughty or condescending. Every morning she came, a little more humble each time, and Amina greeted her with a sincere smile, as if each coffee was a chance for Margaret to redefine herself. It wasn't easy, of course. There were days when Margaret's old habits kicked in, when she still tripped over her reflexes. But little by little, she became more attentive, more respectful, more aware of the way she treated others. She had learned, in a brutal but necessary way, that snap judgments and racism only lead to isolation and suffering. And sometimes, it was those we underestimated, those we reduced to simple waiters or cashiers, who had to teach us the greatest lessons. Amina, for her part, realized that her role was not limited to serving coffee and taking orders. No, his role was much broader. She sowed seeds of respect and humanity where racism, intolerance, and prejudice had taken root. Every smile, every word of support was a small victory against ignorance, a way of remembering that behind every face, every smile, there was a life that deserved to be respected. She hadn't just changed a customer that day. She had unknowingly planted a seed in someone's heart, who, in time, might see the world differently. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.